So this is the Rail Committee meeting for September 21st, 2022. And I'd like to call the meeting to order. Will you take roll, please?
Vice Mayor Koo?
Here.
Mayor Burt?
Here.
Councilmember Cormack?
Here.
3 present. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we will go to oral communications for any item that is not on the agenda. Do we have any?
We do not have any requests to speak.
Very good. Then we'll move on to action items. First one is a verbal update on interagency activities.
Good afternoon. My name is.
Is that what you want to do, staff?
Yeah, thank you. So I believe the order is VTA, Caltrain. I might be doing this wrong. I was just going to pull up the agenda.
I
Sorry.
think it's a Caltrain, VTA, and then city staff.
Okay, thank you. So being that we have Caltrain staff here today, we'll have Caltrain go first.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, Vice Mayor Koo, Mayor Burt, Councilmember Cormack. We really thank you for that opportunity for Caltrain to provide an update on its general items and also share information during your study session on one of our 98 railroad bridges. As this is the first time that we've had the opportunity to share information with this committee, we thought we'd like to take this opportunity to do a little bit of a shared self-introduction of who we are. Starting off, I'm Rob Bernard, Deputy Chief of Rail Development. Over the last 38 years, I've spent much of my time in public service, delivering both transportation and transit public works projects, seeking to weave the various modes of transportation into an integrated whole to help improve the communities that we call home. I started my work at Caltrain about 1.5 years ago, and have had the great honor of working with a lot of talented people to design and construct our capital program. Before that, I had 14 years at TriMet. TriMet is the local transit authority in the Portland region. I started my career at TriMet as the Director of Design and Construction of the Green Line that put light rail through the center of our downtown from one end to the other on 5th and 6th Avenues. That project was finished successfully. I moved on to be the Director of the Orange Line. That was a $1.5 billion light rail project. Managed that project from beginning of preliminary engineering through revenue service. That was also finished successfully, on time, on budget, 0 contractor claims. After that, I moved on to be the Managing Director of Design and Construction for my last 5 years at TriMet. Before that, I had 14 years working on the transportation side of the house for Portland's Transportation Bureau, building all manner of roads and bridges and many multimodal facilities. Portland is really a key leader in multimodal integration and had the great opportunity to work in that city. Before that, I had 8 years exercising my architectural license in the private sector, building buildings in that community. Next, I'd like to turn it over to Lindsay for her to give a brief moment about herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us here today. My name is Lindsay Kiner. I'm a consultant with LK Planning, and I am serving as the project manager on this project with the Caltrain Planning Department. And I have been the project manager for the past 2 years, working in concert with the planning department and also rail development and several other departments in Caltrain. Just really excited to be here. I myself have been a transportation planner for 13 years, started in Los Angeles. And as a Bay Area native, I've been practicing here for about the past 10 years. So I will pass it over to Navi, and she'll also then kick us off into the action items section with the Caltrain update.
Thank you, Lindsay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Navi Dhaliwal, and I am the Government Community Affairs Officer at Caltrain, working on capital projects along the corridor. Previously, I worked across the Northern California region supporting proactive engagement and community outreach projects ahead of major critical infrastructure projects for my clients. I joined the Caltrain team this past May and am looking forward to working alongside you all as our various projects progress. So today, as Lindsay mentioned, I will be giving you all a general Caltrain update. So if you wouldn't mind, next slide, please. So as many of you may already know, Caltrain's historic electrification project is the first undertaking in North America in a generation in which diesel trains and their infrastructure components are transitioned to an electrified system. This project will improve the customer experience by increasing the number of trains, modernizing service, and adding new safety elements. Electrification will also help meet ambitious regional and state climate action goals by lowering greenhouse gas emissions, improving air quality, and relieving traffic congestion. Additionally, electrified service will advance equity along the corridor by reducing noise and air pollution while increasing access for priority equity neighborhoods. I also wanted to take a moment and highlight a few milestones for this project. On August 27th, PG&E made power available at the Traction Power substation. This will allow Caltrain to energize a 6-mile stretch of the southern corridor between Santa Clara and San Jose. Additionally, train sets 3 and 4 have arrived. And we are excited, when completed in 2024, the project will provide faster, safer, and more reliable service. That being said, as you may understand, electrification is quite a large project, and the Caltrain electrification outreach team will be in contact regarding any specific scope of work that will be seen in this region and affecting Palo Alto specifically. Additionally, Caltrain's engineering standards, design criteria, standard drawings, and standard specifications are currently being updated to accommodate an electrified environment. Updated standards are expected to be available at the end of 2022. We are currently reviewing 60% of submittal on our electrification standards, and those are here and available today. At 60% submittals, we are looking at over 350 pages. 65 of the pages have overhead contact system drawings, 26 pages grounding and bonding standard drawings, 37 pages OCS and structure standard drawings. Updates to Caltrain standard specifications are about 116 pages, and updates to Caltrain's design criteria are looking at 107 pages. Quite a few, if you ask me, but I wanted to make sure that we had this here and available for you all, in evidence of where we are at, and just provide an overall general update on these standards. To note, as we finalize our engineering standards to accommodate an electrified corridor, our projects are progressing into final design. For example, we are in the final design at the Broadway Burlingame grade separation project, as well as the Mountain View Transit Center grade separation and access on Castro Street project. Finally, we kicked off the Caltrain corridor-wide grade separation strategy study this summer. A commitment in the Caltrain business plan, the corridor-wide grade separation strategy study will be a multi-year effort and will engage internal and many external stakeholders. A stakeholder-engaged process that seeks consensus on a shared vision and an approach for grade separations informed by the complexity of these challenges. We've provided a verbal update during last month's local policymaker group meeting, LPMG, and our team will be engaging in an overview tomorrow, this Thursday's LPMG, and we are expected to be diving deeper into the study at next month's local policymaker group and Caltrain City and County Staff Coordinating Group meeting, CSCG. And that is the general update for Caltrain today. And next slide. We're happy to address any questions or concerns or follow-up that you might have from the update.
Do you have any questions here?
I do.
Okay.
So can you clarify within, if we go back to previous slide, when you're under the electrification standards versus the corridor-wide grade separation study. As you're probably aware, we're very interested in certain technical standards, some of which involve UP and others which don't. Where does the update to the technical standards fall within these initiatives that you have?
So Mayor Byrd, I appreciate the question. So Caltrain has a well-established set of design criteria today that was last updated in 2020 that we're using to effectively advance the designs, as Navi mentioned, at Broadway and in the city of Mountain View for the Castro grade separation project. And our technical teams are working with the design consultants using that information in order to advance that design work. Now, the published standards that we can put on our website and hand out will be done by the end of this calendar year, but it's not impacting the progress of work. We are building an electrified system. We've got a design builder on board with all the drawings. We've built the system. Now it's just documenting those standards that we can hand out to folks. But for those that are actively engaged with us, our engineers are working with their engineers to advance the drawings. And so that work is one element of just the standard design criteria. I think the second half of the question might have to do with maybe variances to those questions, but I'm not sure.
No, it's both halves of my question have to do with, we've submitted to Caltrain a letter summarizing a series of prospective updates to your technical standards, to your standard technical standards. And we've had discussions with Caltrain over the last year and a half about updates to those standards that would enable them, some of the things that we are interested in doing to not be exceptions, but be allowed under a new set of technical standards.
So,
And the update to that, we've had numerous commitments from Caltrain that it was in the works. And we understand that there have been delays as a result of needing to assemble the team and move forward on that. There were questions as to whether they'd be folded into the broader issues of the corridor-wide study. And more recently, it had been clarified, no, they would be broken off and attempted to be addressed ahead of the full corridor-wide study and just focus on those aspects. That's what my question's about, is where does that update stand?
Mayor Byrd, appreciate the clarification. If I were to pick one of the elements of the letter having to do with 1% grades, we have an existing agreement with Union Pacific Railroad that requires us to maintain their competitive service levels. And so if we were to change our grades, our vertical curves, or other things that would impact their ability to maintain competitive service levels, we need to engage Union Pacific on that. If we were to look at it at a corridor-wide approach, that's one discussion with Union Pacific.
Right, and I alluded to that as
Right.
being a separate subset
Right.
of our questions.
And so that is I believe in our response to the letter, we were happy to be engaged with Union Pacific on that discussion, because it would require a variance and an approval from Union Pacific, keeping in mind that the Surface Transportation Board has jurisdiction to regulate transportation railroads, and they seek to provide uniformity among all of the states. So it is an uphill battle with that negotiation with Union Pacific, but Caltrain stands ready to engage in that. We do see the benefit to the communities that may be doing that, but it is probably a long conversation.
So I would say it's not only benefit to the communities, to the extent that it significantly influences costs for various grade separations throughout the corridor, not all of them, but any that, for instance, it would go up or down, vertical grade and vertical curve would drastically influence cost of those
Right.
construction projects, as well as the impacts of those projects on communities.
Right.
But it influences the whole ability to do a corridor-wide grade separation because we don't have unlimited resources. Either we as cities, you as Caltrain aren't providing those resources at this time, and the other agencies that would be providing them, none of us have those unlimited resources. So I just want to make that point that it's not just benefit to the communities, it's important to the whole study. But I do appreciate that the aspects that are dependent on a negotiation with UP are separate from some of the others. So let's talk about what we can do as opposed to what we can't yet do. On the UP side, that may be specific exceptions for our particular grade separations and have to go through that process separately. But as far as standard changes that are within the purview of Caltrain, that's the other part and the one that I'm looking to get clarification on where you stand on that.
So as I think in our response to our letter, it said that in order to get a variance for a particular issue, the details really matter.
No, but we're not talking about variances in this subject. What I've said is, and what we've had a discussion with Caltrain, and most recently I did with Michelle just days ago, is updating of standards, not exceptions, so that not every city doesn't have to go through an exception process and the expense and the time of an exception process for certain upgrades that can be changes and updates to your standards.
So
Can you give an example of what
That would be-
standards might be?
Yeah, I mean, I think we laid out some of them in the letter. We have bridge thickness, we have construction methods like jackbox construction being a permitted construction method. What am I leaving off? Well, those vertical curve and vertical grade are dependent on UP negotiation.
right, and so are the vertical clearances, because vertical clearances do impact the ability to maintain competitive service levels. If you adjust the available height for, let's say, an overcrossing. So anything that impacts the envelope,
Yeah.
those
so-
sorts of things.
So I'm not anticipating that many grade separations going forward will be over crossings
Right.
of roadways over tracks because of the way in which electrification has increased the clearance that's necessary for that. But for underpasses, for instance, my understanding is that on Mountain View's Rengstorff, that Caltrain has approved some form of an exception that has trestle that reduces the thickness of the structure
Right.
that supports the tracks. And having some of those standards, and these are things that have been done elsewhere,
Right.
and having those adopted as a standard as opposed to an exception is what we've been talking about for the last year and a half. And I'll just say that this concept is something that has been agreed to by Caltrain. Sebastian Petty and Michelle had agreed to this previously. It had been agreed publicly through the LPMG process twice in 2 different meetings. So I'm a little taken back by this reverting to exceptions when we had an understanding that Caltrain was going forward with updating standards, and they had asked for our understanding that it was going to take a little longer than they had hoped for and had previously committed to doing.
So I appreciate the clarification, Mayor Burt. On the bridge thickness, there's not really a standard of how thick the structural member has to be. It's what's the thickness necessary to carry that particular load. And that depends on the width between the abutments and the angles of the abutments and the material. If you pick one type of material, it can be rather large. On Mountain View, they changed the structure type to make it thinner. we're all in on trying to make them thinner as long as they carry the loads, and that's just a structural calculation. So the standards don't say I need a 10-foot deep beam, and that's what you got to provide a 10-foot deep beam. What they say is you have to have the capacity to carry this load, and whatever structural method that you provide to carry that load, as long as it meets the engineering standards, carry the load, we're good with that. So that's not really a change to our standard. So that was part of at least my confusion of it. The depth depends on how the span and the angles, and as long as it carries the load, make it as thin as possible, depending on the material that's selected. And so
So for
maybe there's
instance,
some
during our grade
misunderstanding.
separation process, we had the same consulting firm as Caltrain has, AECom. And my recollection is that, and maybe Nadia Naya can clarify this because she shared our XCAP process, but my recollection is that we had an interest in a thinner bridge, and that AECom's understanding from their relationship with Caltrain was that was not permitted, and that maybe if we went through an exception process, we could. Can I ask if Nadia can give a little insight, because she's more knowledgeable on this?
And give an introduction of
Yes.
yourself, please.
Hi, so I'm Nadia Naik. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I chaired the expanded community advisory panel for the city, which is, we're the ones who went through and looked at 3 of the 4 grade separations and worked with AECom on the design work. In addition, I worked with a group called Californians Advocating Responsible Rail Design. So we've been working on high-speed rail issues since 2009. And I'm one of the co-founders of Friends of Caltrain. So you probably know Adina Levin.
Yes.
So with all of that said, I think you're misremembering, but it still brings up a good point. As Mayor Burt said, we have worked with the AECom, which has worked with other cities. Our general experience has been that we are not given the suggestion of saying, hey, in order to reduce this bridge depth, or in order to make it so you don't have to lower the road as far back, you should try a trussed bridge like they did in Mountain View, because that helps save money and helps save the distance. And so I appreciate that some of the things that we've asked for require discussions with Union Pacific, but I think part of the general request is that it would be helpful if the Caltrain standards could point out known issues and be able to suggest things that might be able to resolve those issues, because this thing of the truss bridge is not unique for the city of Palo Alto. It's anybody who has to put a road under the train tracks and not move the train tracks will come into this issue. And I will note that none of the designs that we received from AECom included a bridge of that type. And so we actually are going deeper now.
Or even an alternative for that.
Right. Now, I will say, I'm not an engineer, but I appreciate that the distance between how close Alma Street, the perpendicular street, is to where we are going down also impacts what we can do. But I think that would be an example of the types of things that when we had previous discussions with Sebastian Petty and Michelle Bouchard, some of the things that we talked about was like, hey, as you go through building your new standards for an electrified railroad, there are things that are going to be common among all of the folks building grade separations. And to the extent that anything in those could be made easier, that would be the suggestion.
And the construction method, we had an interest in Jack Box construction, in part because the 3 grade separations we're focusing on are in constrained areas of the corridor. Churchill is
2 feet.
72 feet there, with development on each side, with a narrow thoroughfare right up abutting it. Similar but not quite as severe problems in Charleston East Meadow. Right. So we have greater constraints than most grade separations along the corridor. And the construction impacts for us, but even others, could be horrendous. It's probably an underappreciated aspect. We tend to all look at what's the outcome of that construction project, and the having a multi-year construction project and at potentially higher costs than if we had a construction method like Jack Box, potentially, and we don't know for sure on its applicability here, could have a big impact. But the the response we had previously gotten on Jack Box construction was it's not an approved
So
method, or
it
what?
was, part of it was, I mean, we're talking about 2019, right? Before the world
Right.
changed. So, but part of this conversation was one of the things that would be looked at when we looked at corridor wide stuff was what are the ways in which we could look to try to save money across building this many grade separations corridor wide? Because again,
Right.
I'm on Friends of Caltrain, so this has always been a broader discussion.
Right.
And actually, frankly, at first, when we discussed the jacked box construction with AECom, our AECom team, they told us that they didn't think it was applicable for building railroads. So we then showed them the video of AECom's project in New York doing the Long Island Railroad, and quickly it became a different conversation.
Yeah, we shared that with Mountain View. We had a presentation with Mountain View and VTA to say, here's the benefits of jackboxing.
Oh, good.
And so trying to say that with the electrified alignment, that's one of the ways is tunneling, and other ways that can accommodate construction and minimize impacts. And Mayor Burt, I really do understand the impacts of construction. Managing a light rail project through the center of downtown from building face to building face from one end to the other on 2 blocks. I get how disruptive construction can be, and
So-
to really manage that really well is
So I'm
important.
glad to hear what you just said on what you had supported with Mountain View, because that's the first time we've heard from Caltrain in a multi-year process that indicated support for that. And we've gone, around, we have the same consultants you do. We've had engagement with Caltrain. We've talked about this issue, and this is the first time that we've heard Caltrain embracing that conceptually. And, we appreciated there would be specifics around a
Right.
given grade separation, but
Right.
that's good to hear.
Right, we prepared a pretty lengthy PowerPoint to explain there are alternatives. And then what are the implications of alternative? And alternative analysis, look at the pros and cons of all alternatives to make a reasoned decision, and sharing with them that here's the benefits of those two, realizing Caltrain's brought on a lot of additional new staff
Yep.
that bring a deep level of experience of how to build. And so that is part of the discussion.
So within design standards, once again, it may be that you don't, you're not able to say, look, we approve Jackbox construction in every circumstance or whatever. But as Nadia was alluding to, is this something that you establish and provide for the various cities? Because, we went through this process and kind of identifying what are these constraints, whether it's the bridge thickness and what other methods are out there. Is every city supposed to rediscover all of those problems and potential solutions? Or can we have an update to the design standards that even if they're not prescriptive in what's allowed, they identify the range of what is there and what Caltrain is receptive to? And then it still has to go through an approval process.
Right, and that is exactly the conversation I had with my director of engineering, Zuhair, just the other day, as he prepared that PowerPoint. He goes, I want to include these items in our design criteria so folks know here's the art of the possible.
Good.
So I think we're on the same page there.
Okay, so you've got a presentation to the Mountain View. I think we'd love to see it.
Exactly.
So Mayor Burt, Zohair, we talked with Zohair, and I believe that we're going to get him to possibly, maybe Robert will come with us to provide more information on Jack and Bore as a construction thing in the future. I just want to note that we're about halfway through our meeting here, and we're still on the staff update. I think we're getting some really important information though, but just wanted to
for me,
note that.
this is the crux of it.
Yeah.
And then similarly on just so you know, on Churchill, with that bridge thickness, that potentially is it's significant in that location because we're in a tight area to dip down and come back up.
Right.
And if we don't have to start our downgrades
Vertical curve.
just on the roadway.
Yeah.
As soon, it's a big deal.
Right.
Well,
And,
if I could just add one more that would be super helpful is my understanding is that, and we've done it when we did the Homer Bike pedestrian tunnel that we have here in Palo Alto, is there's potentially a way to lift the tracks up to about 2 feet by injecting ballast underneath the tracks and slightly elevating it. It requires a shutdown over the weekend, which in the past what they did was they worked around Caltrain's schedule to make sure it happened when there was other maintenance going on the line. But it means that you don't have to do shoe fly tracks just to be able to raise the track 1 or 2 feet. And in our situation, we're down to literally worrying about 12 inches, 18 inches at a time. And so if that is also something that could be covered in those design standards or in those construction methodologies, that would be helpful. I mean, clearly it's not the ideal in every situation, but as Mayor Burt said, this is the first time that we're hearing, when we brought up the idea of jacked box, we were told that construction methodology comes last. You first have to design everything that you're going to do, and then you discuss that. And we said, well, hold on a second. It's so complicated and constrained that in this case, it's chicken and egg. You really do have to start with the construction method because you're not going to be able to fit the normal stuff in this spot. And so am I correct in saying that in very constrained areas, the construction methodology actually does guide in some ways the design decisions?
It does matter. And,
Thank you.
and you're stealing a little bit of my thunder in my presentation about how important
By all
that is.
means, bring the thunder.
So I do appreciate that.
This has been very helpful.
You have no idea.
And I think we're on a better track now on this, so.
Okay,
Oh, sorry.
just very quickly, I wanted to ask if Councilmember Cormac has any questions, just so that we make sure that.
No,
has,
I do have one question. I realize that perhaps I should already know this. How many trains does Caltrain have? When you say train sets 3 and 4 have arrived, how many will there be?
That's a great question. I unfortunately do not. I think we've had right now we currently have 4 and I'm still awaiting. I apologize. This is me leaning on me having just joined the team.
Well,
And
welcome.
Maggie May-
I'm just saying this is one of those things when we're always so far down in the weeds. Sometimes
Yeah.
we forget high level points
Yeah.
as kind of thing that could probably be helpful to our community. We say trains are going to be running more frequently, but like if we can say they're going to be X number of trains instead of what there were, why, that kind of thing is helpful.
In the, currently we're running 4 trains per hour,
Right.
per direction in the peak. In 2024 with electrification, that turns to 6 trains per hour per direction in the peak.
I'm asking how many total trains Caltrain has now and how
I'd
many
have to look that up. I don't
total.
have-
And I understand it changes with I just threw that off. Anyway, sorry. Okay, it's been many years, listening to Ms. Nayak on these questions. So appreciate where we are arriving. And I think we can, all just look forward to moving forward in a more cooperative way.
Navi?
Yeah, so just to add, I wanted to, because a lot of our conversations based upon the upcoming or the outstanding grade separation projects, I know that's come up a lot. We have been meeting with Palo Alto City staff to just discuss the service agreement preliminary conversations. And per the request of the city staff, we are happy to attend a future rail committee, either October or November, to discuss just in a lot more specifics, what any additional questions that you may all have. So wanted to make sure that I flagged that. And so we'll, continue to coordinate with whomever, whether it's Philip or Rapone, to get that on the schedule and really have a fleshed out conversation about the separation projects.
Sorry, one more thing to add. Completely legitimate question we get from people all around the city. Are people really going to be riding Caltrain? Will it ever go back to the level that we thought we needed before? So some statement from you all about why you think the moderate business plan is still appropriate or any modifications you might be making to it. We don't have any sense collectively. I'll say I don't have any sense, and we haven't seen this yet, that people who used to work 5 days a week in person here in Palo Alto are going to return to that. We don't have that. So really legitimate questions, and understanding that at a top level, what your thoughts are. Of course, you can't predict the future probably any better than we can. If you can, that'd be great. So let's just incorporate that when you come, because we're going to be asking the community to, for years of disruption, right? Intense and expensive. And we really need a good counter argument to the statement that we don't need to do this anymore. So I just wanted to throw that out.
I'd love to jump on that one. I just tell you, and I don't have the specifics for Caltrain, and they've got modeling and all that, but just to note that generally as you increase frequency and regularity of transit, it becomes more appealing for people. So a service that's less frequent is going to typically have less ridership than a service that's more frequent and regular and on time, which means we need the grade separations.
So we'll work that in, but we also need to acknowledge the fact that I read recently that the Bay Area and Caltrain in particular has been the slowest to rebound from the pandemic in the country. So I think that's a fact, and we need to acknowledge it and come up with some thoughts around that.
I think just to be fair also, you know, they're going through a lot of transformation in terms of going from the type that they have now to electric. So there's some of that component as well as for the bounce back. But obviously, you know, we're very excited that the team has been compiled and that now we're moving forward and we're able to get some answers as we move forward. So very excited to have you guys on board and the team formed. Look forward to hearing from you more. And if Zohair is available to join us at some point to give presentations and so forth, that would be super as well. So thank you for being here. Do you have anything else to add? Or Philip?
I have some OT, I should say Office of Transportation staff updates to provide. I really want to thank Caltrain and note that Zohair was very eager to come and share he sounded like he was excited to share all of his knowledge. So just to note, as Caltrain staff noted, they would be willing to come October or November, but just noting with scheduling, we have a big item that we need to bring to Rail Committee, and we could do it in either October or November, but I think it would be potentially better for us to bring it in October. And what that is all of the feedback on design refinements that we've heard from our Pedestrian Bicycle Advisory Committee, our City School Traffic Safety Committee, our PAUSD, Stanford, and the original designers of some of the concepts. So that's something that we do want to bring to share with Rail Committee. So potentially that would be the next meeting, and I anticipate that it will take quite a bit of time to go over that. And we anticipate that it would be like a study session and then potentially to follow with an action item at a following meeting, which maybe would take less time than the study session, I think, to go through everything.
Will the organizations be here as well? Or is
Yeah,
it
well, we could invite any of them that would be interested in coming, certainly.
Okay.
Yeah, and I believe at least Payback had designated a subcommittee. Yes, thank you. A subcommittee that would definitely be interested in coming. I'm not sure.
It'd be nice to see them.
Yeah, I'm not sure about PAUSD or Stanford or others, but potentially.
Okay.
The Quiet Zone study for Palo Alto Avenue and in collaboration with Menlo Park is initiating. As Caltrain mentioned, we had preliminary conversations about a service agreement, which Caltrain has expressed willingness to come and speak at one of our upcoming meetings. And finally, as Mayor Burt alluded to earlier, Mayor Burt, Nadia Nayak, and myself had a brief informal meeting with Caltrain where we shared and discussed our understandings and technical concerns. And I don't know, Mayor Burt, if you wanted to, or Nadia, if you had anything you'd like to add about that. But I think it was a very good discussion that we had.
Do you want to share a summary quickly, or is it the things that are in the letter, the technical?
Well, it was regarding the things that were in the technical letter, primarily some of the issues I think we actually talked about today, including UP and just understanding how to interpret the response to the technical concerns that we had in the letter, and also some advocacy for paths forward for dealing with the technical issues.
If I may, I think the most salient thing as an advocate that I found useful for that conversation, that's important to make sure that the public's informed of, is that as the Caltrain staff said, they're working, their system will be electrified. And upon completion of that, one of the things they have to do is make sure that they have their design criteria for what it's like to build on an electrified railroad, because that's different than building on an unelectrified railroad. And their delay in being able to deal with the corridor-wide stuff should not impede Palo Alto's ability to have conversations and move forward on the things that we want to. And so while we may have been more hopeful in 2019 that there would have been a wider discussion of technical standards that might be able to address some of our concerns, that Michelle Bouchard made it super clear that she is very sensitive to our time schedule and wants to make sure that the new staff that's become available at Caltrain will work with us flexibly to be able to deal with our issues. And so variance isn't necessarily the best term. It's more, we'll have to talk to you about your ongoing problems while we continue to solidify what are the standards for the entire rail line as we figure this out. And so that was helpful for us who've been feeling, we didn't want to feel like Palo Alto was being held back. And it gave me the assurance that certainly just the knowledge you've brought into this room today after this many years gives me confidence that we've changed direction in a much better way. And I feel personally much better about it.
Yeah, and just following up on,
Yeah, Mike.
I'm sorry. Following up on Nadia's comments on kind of the timing, what we had shared and was well appreciated by Michelle and others is that we had been on really one-time schedule, pre-pandemic, then post-pandemic, feeling a little more not surplus time, but adequate time as a result of the kind of delayed recovery and in the implementation of the higher service levels that essentially trigger the necessity for the grade separations being complete. But then the new ball game is the massive state and federal funding available that didn't exist previously, primarily the federal funding, and the necessity for us to be at a point in our preferred alternative selection that qualifies us for that funding round, and to make sure that we don't have delays in those issues. And frankly, some of the things that you've already helped clarify have been delays for 2 years of us seeking those clarifications. So this has been helpful. And then I didn't know on the San Francisco Creek Bridge update. That's next. Okay, good.
That's the next item. Yes.
Good. Just want to make sure.
Mr. Bernard, no?
Or just whenever you're ready for us to do that presentation, but I wasn't.
Okay, I was going to
Let us
hand
know.
it back
Yeah,
to
if we could,
Mr. Kami.
That concludes our updates, and apologies, I had to just run out really quickly. So I think with that, we can move on. Chair, if you're ready to move on to the next item. Apologies, because I just noticed that we spelled our little San Francisco Creek Bridge incorrectly here.
It gave me a head fake over the weekend. I went, do I be spelling it wrong?
But
It's funny. All right.
before we
Did we
move
wanna-
on to the
yeah.
next, we need to take a public
Oh,
comment.
yes,
So
thank you.
We'll see if there's any public comment. Mr. City Clerk.
There are no requests to speak.
Okay, very good. Then we can close that and move to our study session. Item 2, the Caltrain presentation, discussion on the San Francisco Creek Bridge. Francisquito.
Yes. Again, good afternoon, Vice Mayor Koo, Mayor Burt, Councilmember Cormac. We really appreciate and are thankful for the opportunity to share information on one of Caltrain's 98 railroad bridges. Lindsay and I are here to give you that update on that San Francisco Bridge, providing information on the background story, a little bit of the overview and the analysis that we did, our recommendation on next steps, a draft preliminary high-level schedule, and then share some thoughts on goals and next steps. With that, turn it over to Lindsay for the background.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Just gonna take my mask off for a minute so you can hear me better. Oh, please advance to the next slide.
One more.
One more. Okay, great. So I'm going to dive into some of the history of the bridge and the context of the area surrounding the bridge. So we've got 2 photos here. The one on the left shows the original structure of the bridge that was built in 1864. The structure was made of wood and it was single track, as you can see there. You can also see the El Palo Alto tree there. And the structure that stands today was built in 1902. It's shown on the right, sort of the darker image with the train going through. And you'll see there, it's double track, and it thankfully is no longer made of wood. It's a steel truss structure. And given that it was built in 1902, it's over 120 years old. So the the name for the creek, San Francisco Creek, gives the name to the bridge itself. So it spans over the San Francisco Creek, which is the border between Palo Alto and Menlo Park in this area. And I mentioned the El Palo Alto tree, which you can see just beside the bridge, very close to the east, shown in both of these photos. And it's important to note that the bridge and the tree are eligible on the National Registrar of Historic Places. And that's a topic we'll dive into more detail later in the project during the environmental phase. And next slide, please. Great. So now we're going to look at some maps and get oriented and just give us an idea of the geographic context of the project. So let's get oriented. I just want to point out that the creek, again, you can see is the border between your city and Menlo Park. It's also important to note what jurisdictions we're dealing with here. So Palo Alto, of course, is located in Santa Clara County. When you cross over the bridge and you're in Menlo Park, you are then in the county of San Mateo. So this geographic area spans not just 2 cities, but 2 counties. And starting south of the bridge, just moving north up the right of way. So you can see the north arrow, we've turned it on its side, but just for ease of viewing, we've got the Palo Alto station. It's almost a half mile from the bridge. We've also got El Camino Park, which is in green. And then of course, downtown Palo Alto on the other side of the right of way. And I want to point out really our key area for sure. And we've got colors to help. So in yellow, you'll see the Palo Alto Avenue intersection, which is currently at grade. And it is only 330 feet, what I like to call a stone's throw, from the San Francisco Bridge, which is shown in red. And then we've labeled the El Palo Alto tree with a little icon there in green. So you can see that area, how everything's quite close. And so not only is this area geographically constrained in terms of space, but it's also important to note that the creek itself is a sensitive environment. And some of us may recall that it was the site of a serious flooding event in 1998. And this event actually prompted the formation of the San Francisco Creek Joint Powers Authority, or the JPA. And they're the agency that implement projects to mitigate the risk of flooding along the creek as well as the bay. Not shown here, but we would like to note is the Searsville Dam, which is located about 6 miles south of the bridge in Redwood City. This is a project that Stanford is doing because they own the dam, and they're currently in the environmental phases right now to modify it. And their intent is to provide fish passage and attenuation of high flows, plus clear out years of sediment buildup at the dam. And we've been coordinating with them on this project because the creek right here, it feeds directly into the dam and the reservoir. And I'd like to move on to the next slide where we can transition slightly north on the right of way and take a look at the Menlo Park context. So moving north into Menlo Park, you can still see the San Francisco Bridge in red, and then that small yellow rectangle is the Palo Alto Avenue intersection. So first, in sort of a darker blue, we've got the Stanford Park Hotel. That's private property that's just right along our right of way. Along the back side of the hotel, so that's the west side of the right of way, there is a rain garden / bioretention area that's associated with the Middle Plaza project. And if you just move slightly north, also in turquoise or teal, is the Middle Plaza development. It's being developed by Stanford University. It is their property. It's going to be a mixed-use retail, housing, and commercial development. It's fairly far along. Construction started in 2018. And if you go by there now, you'll see that they started paving and sidewalks. Then just a little bit on the other side of Middle Plaza, also in yellow, we have the Middle Avenue undercrossing. And this is a planned undercrossing exclusively for bikes and pedestrians that's currently around 30% design. We are working jointly with the city of Menlo Park on this project and have a service agreement with them. And then as you move further north, we've got several grade crossings. Ravenswood grade crossing is the first one just past Burgess Park. That is still in the planning stages with the hybrid option currently being recommended by the board in their 2019 project study report. And then as you move further north, not all shown here, there are several other crossings. We have Oak Grove, Glenwood, Encinal, and they're all closely spaced about 1/10 of a mile to 1/3 of a mile apart. And we can move to the next slide. This just gives you another view. I think it's really helpful just to get that bird's eye aerial view. So this is an aerial viewpoint of the bridge looking north. You can see Alma, El Camino Real, and you can see how close the Palo Alto Avenue intersection is to the bridge. And then in the bottom right-hand corner is a photo of the Palo Alto Avenue intersection looking east. And then also on the right, we've listed exact locations like the milepost, in case that's helpful for orientation. I think the key takeaway here we really want to emphasize is that the grade crossing is very close to the bridge. Again, it's about 330 feet away. And next slide, please. So I just want to talk a little bit about our activities to date. So following engagement with jurisdictional stakeholders in the spring of 2021, including Palo Alto staff, we decided that we needed to conduct a detailed inspection and analysis of the San Francisco Bridge. This was driven by a few factors. So as we mentioned, the bridge is over 100 years old. And secondly, although we regularly inspect all of our bridges for safety and FRA compliance throughout the year, we needed to do a detailed inspection to understand the condition of the materials underneath the ballast and also any steel elements that can't be seen by the naked eye. So we did just this in the fall of 2021, which Rob will be talking more about in the next slides. We've got some great pictures of when we had our team out there. And you might also be curious about who we've been speaking with, who are the stakeholders we've been coordinating with during the course of this project. So I mentioned, of course, Palo Alto. We've also been coordinating with the City of Menlo Park, the VTA staff, the San Francisco Creek Joint Powers Authority, and the Stanford Land Buildings and Real Estate Group. And we just wrapped up another round of engagement with these stakeholders this summer where we've been sharing the same information, the same updates we're sharing with you today, where we've come back and said, these are the results of our detailed inspection and our loading analysis. So next, I'm going to pass it to Rob, and he's going to talk about this bridge inspection and what we found out.
Thank you, Lindsay. Next, I'd like to share the information on what we did to kind of improve our understanding of this current status of this 120-year-old bridge. This included 3 weekends worth of work. Our first weekend, of course, our teams removed the debris and vegetation to get a good look underneath the hood. Our engineers also performed inspection of the track and the bridge members from the upper area. And we also documented existing conditions with some on-site photos of the bridge, of course, the El Palo Alto tree and the surrounding conditions. Next slide, please. During our second weekend, we performed 3 distinct activities. The first was performing the inspection of underside of the bridge now that all the debris was cleared away. The second was performing a detailed LiDAR scan of the bridge to create a highly accurate 3D model to support our structural analysis. And the third thing we did was we set up equipment to measure the live load deflection. So we set up some high-speed cameras and we measured how much the bridge flexed under loading. So on both freight trains and passenger trains went across the bridge, we could take a look at what the loading deflection was. Next slide, please. During that third weekend, we also installed strain gauges on both the horizontal and vertical members of the truss to record stresses. You'll see that graph on the right. It's got some tall peaks and some short peaks. Those tall peaks are UP's freight trains, which have heavier loads. And the short peaks are from Caltrain's passenger trains that have lighter loads. Next slide, please. Also during that third weekend, to support our structural analysis, as any engineer wants is more information, more data. So they really wanted to find out, well, what is that 120-year-old steel really like? So we needed to get some samples to analyze the metal composition and determine its strength. So we had to go about collecting those samples. So the first thing you see is we created an enclosure so we wouldn't have those sparks cause any issues with the surrounding vegetation. Collected the samples you can see on the right and sent them off to the lab for figuring out the metal composition and figuring out what's the capacity of that steel, how strong is that steel. So we also did that. Next slide, please. So with all of that work and a whole lot of structural calculations, what did we learn? First of all, we learned the bridge is not in imminent danger of collapsing. That's good news. We also found no cracks. That's also good news. However, given its age and 120 years of continued use, the cracking risk has increased and will continue to do so. We found for a bridge of its age that the members are in pretty good shape and have minimal deterioration. That was good. However, the strength testing found that the material was weaker than we expected. So we did our analysis and it determined that the bridge rates below the AREMA's normal freight live loading requirements. This graphic illustration here of the bridge shows the structural members. Those that are highlighted in red are deficient under normal rating. They don't meet normal freight live loading requirements. The members in purple have a negative remaining fatigue life. Industry best practices recommends that when you have a negative remaining fatigue life, that action is necessary. Next slide, please. So with this analysis, we had some actions to do. So we wanted to evaluate what the range, the art of the possible, what are our choices from both an operational perspective and a capital perspective. Operationally, given the bridge no longer rates, what operational changes need to occur? Given that the bridge has a negative remaining fatigue life, what capital projects do we need to do? And as we all know, working in the public sector, there are many, many elements to consider on a public works project. So the team created a list and did some analysis of what are the things that we should consider as we're working towards developing a recommendation. What should be the things in our decision-making matrix as we're evaluating options? For example, timeline. When should we do it? How long would it take? Operational, what would be the impacts to the traveling public and to freight in the communities? Coordination with Menlo Park, they have projects. Coordinating with Palo Alto, they have projects. So you heard Lindsay talk about, we met with those folks. And of course, Union Pacific Railroad, coordinating with them and letting them know that we had some operational things to consider. Next slide, please. So we developed some recommended next steps. It's important to remember that Caltrain has two primary roles on the corridor. First, of course, is to maintain the railroad in a state of good repair to provide that efficient and reliable service that our communities depend on. So from an operational perspective, what we do? So we've restricted train movements. We've issued train orders to allow only one freight train on the bridge at a time. And that passenger trains have to hold at control points while the freight train passes. So that there are two freight windows, one in the morning from midnight to 5 a.m. and another from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. During those windows, when there's a freight train coming across that bridge, Caltrain's passenger trains hold, let the freight train go by, and then we continue service. And we'll need to continue to do that until that bridge is replaced. The second, we needed to increase our monitoring action, which is one of the recommendations when you have a negative remaining fatigue life. So we'll continue our annual inspections. We inspect our bridges every single year, but we're going to supplement that with an additional inspection every 6 months. So essentially every 6 months, the bridge gets an inspection, doubling our inspection. However, given that the bridge has that negative remaining fatigue life, I mean, it's at the point now it's subject to cracking. And you don't want the cracks to get bigger, and you don't want them to get bigger at the 6-month intervals between your inspections. So in a preponderance of caution and to enhance our risk management, we're seeking to install continuous acoustic emission monitoring, which is done on other bridges across the United States. You put on these instruments and it monitors it 24/7, and it gives you indication when there's a crack. And so you can get on there and get it fixed before it gets bigger. So we're seeking to install that system. Next slide, please. So Caltrain also has a role to be a good community partner. How can we collectively leverage this 150-year-old alignment that goes through 20 cities and 3 counties? How can we leverage this regional asset to strengthen the livability and the economic vitality of these communities we call home? This is a great asset for this region. We need to make sure that we leverage that asset. We've had lots of meetings with lots of stakeholders, and what we heard, in a perfect world, we would integrate the bridge work with the grade separation of Palo Alto Avenue and do them as one project. However, we do understand how critical it is to ensure that there's sufficient time for the Palo Alto community to explore and develop a grade separation alternative to help implement the community's vision. And we know that critical process takes time. But Caltrain does stand ready to partner with the city to help develop its community vision for grade separations. Next slide, please. However, implementing the replacement of the bridge is time bound. The bridge, as you heard us say, it's 120 years old. It is nearing the end of its service life. We're doubling our inspections. We're seeking to add acoustic emission monitoring 24/7. We're restricting train movements, 1 freight train at a time, passengers hold. And we'll need to take action to replace this bridge in the near future. However, replacing this structure is complex and in a sensitive environment, and that's going to take quite a bit of time. Additionally, as you know, this is in a highly constrained right-of-way, and there appears to be no room for a 2-track shoe fly. So construction will impact the traveling public, it will impact freight, and it will impact the community. The longer we wait, the older the bridge gets. The longer we wait, ridership is forecasted, we hope, to increase. And with these considerations, the bridge really needs to be replaced by 2033. Next slide, please. As mentioned, replacing the bridge is time bound. This graphic here shows the forecasted increase in train service from 2022 to 2040. So it really has value here to understand the impact to the traveling public. Just today, there are 4 trains per hour per direction in the peak. It's 1 train every 15 minutes in the morning and in the evening. In 2024, in accordance with our full funding grant agreement with the FTA, electrification service has to increase to 6 trains per hour per direction, 1 every 10 minutes. Now in 2033, if we all had a crystal ball, the projection would be 10 trains per hour per direction. That's 1 every 6 minutes. But I want to put that a little bit in context. What does it mean for the Palo Alto community, the commuters that live and work here? As you remember, prior to the pandemic in those days, right? We all look back fondly on those days. Palo Alto Station had 3 of the top 15 fullest trains on the Caltrain system. Number 2, number 5, and number 9 for the southbound commute. These trains exceeded capacity. They were at crush loading. The California Avenue station was number 11. So at the Palo Alto station in 2018 and in 2019, the annual peak per train loading was 712 passengers northbound and 703 passengers southbound. With that limited opportunity for a 2-track shoe fly, there's a high probability that some form of bus bridging may be necessary during that construction. So with electrification projected to be complete in 2024 and our requirement with the FTA as part of our full funding grant agreement to provide service of 6 trains per hour per direction. During construction, excluding high-speed rail, just the Caltrain trains were obligated to provide service. That's 1 train every 10 minutes. So imagine for the northbound commuters, a train would stop at Palo Alto Station or thereabouts, would offload 700 or so passengers onto a fleet of buses, drive them from Palo Alto to Menlo Park, and then get the 700 passengers off the fleet of buses to a waiting train to continue their journey northbound. For the southbound passengers would be another fleet of buses going the other direction from Menlo Park to Palo Alto. The how, Nadine, matters a lot. As the number of trains per hour and the number of passengers are projected to increase, the impact to the region's commuters will also increase. Now, these next few slides kind of overlay how these planned service increases relate to a preliminary draft schedule. Next slide, please. So first, we estimate, given the complexity, that from start to opening will take about 9 years worth of work. As you know, public works projects in a complex environment take time. So given the condition of the bridge and these other factors that we've talked about, that new bridge really needs to be in service by that red line on the right there that says 2033. At that point, the bridge is 130 years old. With that framework, we have a couple of years, at least 2 years, before Caltrain is compelled to begin the work on getting a designer on board to do design, and begin that work to replace the bridge. So our goal here is we have a couple of years before we got to get started. Right now, we've just issued, going to the board Monday to award the contract for the Guadalupe River Bridge. We'll build that bridge. And when that's done, in that 2-year period, it's time to get going on the next one. And this is the next one based on its condition. But our goal is during that time frame is to collaboratively coordinate with Palo Alto and their technical teams with the goal to seek to minimize any potential rework that would be necessary at the Palo Alto Avenue crossing. We have to do work on the bridge, but we want to do it in a way that tries to minimize and leaves that project as harmless as possible, so there's not rework of public money. We all have a fiduciary responsibility to spend public money and spend it wisely and not spend $1 once to do one thing and then another $1 to redo it. Next slide, please. This next section shows a very preliminary high-level draft schedule. You can see with the star there, those are those 2 years that we really want to spend time digging in and coordinating and planning as best that we can in the time we have. In 2025, we hope to select a preferred bridge alternative, the what. And then also in 2025 is work on the alternative delivery analysis and decision report, and that is the how. That is it a CMGC? Is it a progressive design build? Is it low bid? Is it a P3 or is it other? What would be the construction delivery method? Because I think on this bridge, the how matters a lot. The next couple of years are getting the NEPA and CEQA environmental clearance. This is a highly regulated area with many, there's a long list of permits that will be necessary. We figure it'll take about 4 years to get to the design and procurement process. It'll take a couple of years for construction. Next slide, please. Between now and when the bridge is replaced, we'll continue with those operational restrictions, 1 freight train at a time, passenger trains hold, whether the freight train goes by. And we'll continue our increased monitoring, continuing to do double inspections until the continuous acoustic emission monitoring is in place. So we'll continue to do that. Next slide, please. Goals and next steps. I'd like to share some information on our thoughts on our goals and potential next steps. As you've heard me say, Caltrain's goal is to be a good community partner. There are 41 at-grade roadway crossings on Caltrain's right of way. As this committee well knows, and others along the corridor, there are many benefits associated with the grade separation project. Although not a regulatory requirement for much of Caltrain's right-of-way, as a community partner, these are high priorities for Caltrain. Caltrain is the implementing lead for projects in our operating right-of-way. Currently, there are 5 grade separation projects in active design for approximately $1 billion that we have right now. We're working with South San Francisco on the South Linden Avenue. We're working with San Bruno on Scott Avenue. Those projects have gone to our board. We're issuing RFPs for preliminary engineering. The Broadway grade separation in the city of Burlingame is in final design, and Rangsdorf and Castro and Mountain View are active as well. Castro was in final design, and we're just now advancing the PE, a final design with Castro, and VTA just authorized another $42 million to advance that project. And we have agreements with them to use the Measure A, Measure W, and Measure B funds for those projects. And as you well know, there are many more that are in planning with local jurisdictions. So there's a lot of work. So Caltrain hired me along with many others, and we've been charged with rebuilding and strengthening the Caltrain team to ensure we have that technical capacity and capability to design and deliver work with excellence, and to retool our capital delivery process. Over the last 18 months, we have made steady progress on that goal. We've been focusing on 4 critical areas to meet that responsibility. First is the people. We are in the people business. These projects are complex. They affect the community. They cost an enormous amount of money. You have to bring the talent that knows how to deliver these projects. So we've hired 21 new people for rail development in the last 18 months. Brought on new directors for engineering, new directors for program management, for project controls and fiscal governance, new directors for capital program delivery, new deputy directors, new senior project managers, new senior engineers, up and down the chain, in order to bring the talent needed to deliver this work that's so critical to our communities. So that was goal 1, get the people. Our next is to enhance our tools and reporting, because you manage what you measure. So we retool both our monthly reports and our quarterly reports to make them more rigorous and more detailed, to get that early indication when there's an issue, when there's still time to do something about it. We've enhanced our fiscal governance with command and feedback, enhancing the management committee, which is chaired by Michelle, to provide better oversight of our work programs at every gate and approval milestone, to provide oversight at any request to change in scope, schedule, or budget. We reinvigorated our contract control committee, chaired by myself, to provide oversight of contract changes and better oversight of contingency management. The third area of focus has been on organizational development, strengthening the team. How do you grow the next generation? Part of that is our efforts to update our manuals and our procedures with lessons learned and industry best practices. The next is to train the team. So we've launched a Training Tuesday series to teach internal processes, and launched a First Friday training series to bring in folks from industry, outside industry, on industry best practices, and also cross-divisional training. And our fourth area, Nadia, is on construction delivery tools, because the how matters. So we're expanding the palette of available construction delivery types to include additional methods that facilitate effective management of project risks and increase cost and schedule certainty. On the $1.5 billion light rail project, had 10 different contract segments. Some of them were 2-step low bid. Some were CMGC, some were design build, some were design, furnish, and install. It really depended on the risk profile and the challenges of the particular piece of work and what was the right delivery model. It was finished on time, on budget, and no claims, because the how matters a great deal. And you want to determine that how early. The best opportunity is at the LPA is determining the how. If you want to do a design build, you develop one set of packages and assemble one type of team. If it's low bid, it's a totally different type of package and team. CMGC is a third. Making that decision early gives you the best benefit. So as an example, on the Mountain View Transit Center grade separation and access project, we did that alternative analysis, determine what was the most appropriate method. The CMGC was selected. We went to the board to adopt the findings. We're getting ready to issue the RFP for CMGC next month. And we're doing the same evaluation of what's the appropriate delivery method for the Broadway grade separation in the city of Burlingame. And we're going to do the same thing with Rainstorf, the same that we did for the one at Castro with Mountain View. And you'll have noticed in the service template agreement we sent you, that is one of the defined steps, is to always do the alternative delivery analysis as part of the process. You'll also see on this slide here, our teams are working to enhance our efficiency through active and frequent collaboration. The conversations among the technical teams, our standards have a lot of, this is, you shall do this, kind of black and white. There are a lot of things that are guidance that require professional judgment. We really encourage local jurisdictions to engage us so we can have those conversations on things that are professional judgment, whereas the owner of the railroad that has to operate the railroad that has complex systems that are safety critical, we can have those conversations. Is it, well, what's the art of the possible here? Let's have that dialogue, as opposed to maybe just a consultant having that conversation. Invite us into the tent, because that's so critical to say, how can we flex these and still meet our intent, but use good judgment? So we really want to do that. And we're meeting with the Palo Alto staff in our hopes to execute a service agreement to support our active involvement with grade separation planning work for both Churchill, Meadow, and of course, Charleston. Now we have a lot of other Measure B work that we're doing that are in active planning, and some that we're leading right now, like at Rainstorf and at Castro. And we do meet regularly with the city and VTA, and we want to do the same thing with your team here as well. Now, one other thing, it's important to note that we've initiated conversations with VTA's leadership, Michelle and Carolyn, and with their senior staff, Casey Moto and myself, on the development of an integrated project approach. As we collectively seek to deliver this portfolio of Measure B work, we're asking ourselves, are there ways to leverage the strengths of each agency, to use those collective strengths to enhance the efficient and cost delivery of projects? If VTA has a really good utility engineer, a good scheduler that's got extra capacity, bring them on board. I don't care what business card they have. We're trying to deliver the public's work. If Palo Alto has somebody who's really good at these things, let's do an integrated team to deliver this portfolio. This is the public's work. It shouldn't be yours or mine. It's our work with public money doing integrated. That orange line I talked about, $1.5 billion, had 14 funding partners. Let's get an integrated team. What do you have that can help us move this project forward that's in the best interest of the public? I don't care who you work for. Let's get together as an integrated team. So we're exploring that. We have a working group that's working through that process. So I think that's important to note. And of course, we have a commitment to exploring alternative delivery approaches. As you can see on the arrow there, it's a highly constrained area with the El Palo Alto tree, the creek, and many other items that Lindsay shared with us. And the new Caltrain team has a really deep level of experience on alternative contract delivery. And so we're going to explore all those methods, but the goal here is to minimize the construction impacts. Building a light rail project from one end of downtown to the other, from building face to building face, has an enormous level of impacts. And the how matters a lot. We didn't put one person out of business in that construction because we paid an enormous level of attention on the how. And also enhance cost and schedule certainty. This is the public's money. How much will it cost and when will I be done? That is a primary driver of project success. And also the effective management of risk. With that early contractor involvement, you can have the discussion about risk. And so this is part of our standard business practices, so doing those alternative contract delivery analysis is part of our standard templates, but really seeking to figure out what's the right way for the right project. And in closing, after a lot of talking, which I appreciate your patience, we have about 2 years before we got to get started in design in earnest. And there are two things that of note we just wanted to share. One is we did look at the high-speed rail final environmental impact report, and it does show replacing those spirals between the bridge and Palo Alto. Although they're noted on the plans as a shift versus a realignment, it looks like under a foot of a shift. There's 7,000 foot curves, 6,700 foot curves, very minor shifts from what we have. And they do tie into the existing track at the bridge and at the station. And actually there are some places in the middle of those curves that tie into our existing track. So it's smoothing the curves to accommodate the 110 miles per hour. Second, given the close proximity of the bridge to the crossing, the Palo Alto station, our preliminary intent is to not to raise the bridge, but maybe look at shifting it, maybe if we can, a little farther away from El Palo Alto tree. But there are trees on the other side as well and other things. But our intent, preliminary intent, is not to raise it up, because you raise it up, it raises everything up. But finally, we really want to build on our efforts of efficiency through collaboration. We want to extend this effort to be more than just the 3 grade crossings you have in active planning, but really include discussions on the bridge and Palo Alto Avenue, and engage with your team at the technical level with the goal to minimize the impact to replacing the bridge and minimize any rework that would be necessary for a future grade crossing at Palo Alto Avenue. How can we make sure we only spend the public's money once, not twice? And finally, of course, replacing the bridge is time bound. But we do understand it's important to ensure there is sufficient time for the Palo Alto community to explore and develop a grade separation alternative to advance the community's vision for that area. And those things take a lot of time. So we appreciate that. With that, Vice Mayor Koo, Mayor Burt, Councilmember McCormack, we were happy to answer any of your questions. And I appreciate your patience. I know that was a lot.
Well, I think it's very worthwhile. We've been waiting for this for quite a while. So it's just a pleasure that the team has been assembled. And I will open it up for questions. Councilmember Cormack.
Well, Mr. Bernard, we're used to 7-hour meetings as a routine, so this is like nothing. This
Okay,
is like a
yeah.
warm up for us. I do feel like, we should break into a round of the Hallelujah chorus. I'm not kidding. I haven't been doing this as many years as some others, but enough years to know that we haven't gotten close to anything that looks like this level of detail in quite some time. Mayor Burt and I both have served as directors and alternate on the JPA, and this has just been a looming issue for some time. You do not have to tell us how hard it is to get the permits, because all those lovely schedules you showed for the JPA are years behind. Really, I can't overstate how pleased I am to see the new talent that is arriving and ready to work with us. So that's at a high level. Just a few things, I appreciate having the map of Menlo Park. We've had many people say over the years that we should be coordinating with Menlo Park. And certainly there was, an elevated concept that would make a lot of this, way easier. Am I right in interpreting from what you showed that, that there isn't a lot of reason for us to coordinate with Menlo Park in terms of the grade separations we do? I just want to, surface that and figure out what, if anything, we should be coordinating with them.
So I appreciate that, Councilmember Cormac. If I understand that they're looking at a hybrid option. And so as any engineer, I am an architect, but as any engineer would say, that the details matter a lot in answering that question. If there's a desire to raise and have a raise Palo Alto Avenue, raise the station and raise Menlo Park, and then raise the bridge, having those conversations and coordinating would be of value. If the community's vision is, no, we really want to have it more at grade and have it be an underpass, or have the road go over, there's not so much a need to coordinate. So it depends on what is the desired outcome for the elevation of the rail alignment, as to whether there's the need to coordinate. Because when you pick it up, currently at 1%, it takes a while to get back down, and they are pretty close together. So it depends on what the vision would be.
Yeah.
If it's, no, we're not going to raise the rail because that would impact the Palo Alto station and other things, and it would ripple, and that would increase the cost. When you pick it up, it ripples, and then it increases cost. And so we're going to either go under it or we're going to go over it, or maybe we'll go up just a little. Then it would be good. Then there's not so much a need to coordinate.
All right. Well, I think
Did
this,
that, I don't know if that helped answer.
yeah, Lindsay.
Yeah, just if I could add to that, I think, we met with the Public Works folks over at Menlo Park, I think it was in August, and, they expressed just a lot of openness to coordinating with you guys in general. And I think Navi would agree, like, it's good to coordinate. It's good to be in the mix. They shared with us that they expect to be revisiting their PSR, their preliminary study report, imminently. And so the timing really could be right to kind of get together. And, as you look at that map, you see just a number of grade steps just stacking, right? And then as you go past Ravenswood, it really, they're even closer together. So I'd say, even if there isn't an express need, I think that there's just a general good neighbor, let's get together, let's talk. We're happy to be part of those conversations. So just passing that along, that, and you guys are working with them on the quiet zone study. So I think there's just, why not, right? I think in general, to see where this goes. So just wanted to add that there's a willingness there, and just a good neighborly effort that we heard.
Right.
Sorry, and just to note that staff has been coordinating with them, and not just on the quiet zone, but also on this as a potential issue. I think one of the things that we discussed with Menlo Park is that we'd like to potentially have our next meeting together with Caltrain, so that we're all discussing this in one group.
We'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, I
That'd
think
be
we
great.
have a collective action item, to re-engage at that.
Yeah.
Okay, great. That's on the Menlo Park part. Thanks for the photos on the bridge inspection. Super helpful. You had me really scared there. So I was glad when you said that it is not in danger of imminent collapse. I'm not an engineer, so let me just test my understanding. Negative remaining fatigue life, does that mean it could break at any time?
No, so
Because it sounds scary.
it does. It is a complex structural calculation that has many variables to input that are based on professional judgment. And so that's why it's, what are the exact number of trains that have gone across that bridge in the last 120 years? What was the exact weights of those bridges? Because it's like remember the old metal hangers that you
Yes.
could bend back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, eventually they would break. So that's your steel on your bridge. It's bending, and how many times you get to bend it before it breaks. And so it's
an estimate.
an estimate.
Okay.
So when it gets down to a negative, it means, well, we got to start paying a little bit closer attention to it. It's getting kind of old.
Okay.
And it's not an imminent danger, but it's time to start paying better attention.
I got it. And I appreciate the description Is it frequent that the restricted train movements have to occur? Yeah, I didn't think so.
No,
It can't be that many times that
It's about
there's,
about 1 to 2 trains in each of the, it's
Per
mainly
day.
the 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. There's 1 or 2 trains that pass through there.
okay,
But the incidence of like a passenger train approaching at the same time as a freight, is that what you're asking?
yeah, I mean, how often are we having to
That's-
hold a
It's
passenger train for freight?
It's pretty infrequent,
Yeah,
and I know
thought
that
so.
our ops team has actually been looking at just all the reports every day and feeds just to see like how often this is
Yeah.
happening, and it's pretty rare, but it's important that we have that rule on the books so that we're not
Understandable.
straining that bridge. So, but yeah, that's a good question. It's fairly uncommon, and just what Rob was saying is, very few trains even coming in those windows, right?
Good,
And
but
we looked at the delay, and this is midday, if there was a passenger train being held at a control point, it wouldn't be more than like a few minutes, it's
Yeah.
a short bridge, right?
Great.
It's the other thing.
Great.
Yeah, in a 50-mile-an-hour zone. So,
okay,
yeah.
all
but it's
good.
about 4.5 miles from the control point. So you're holding and then you're picking up from that 4.5 miles to get across the bridge. So you've been held for a couple minutes.
Okay. So bus bridging, I know I'm sure not the only person who was immediately like, we're just gonna get a fleet of bikes. We're gonna put people on those bikes. They're just gonna bike up to, Menlo Park, and then they'll all be waiting for them to come back down. So I appreciate you walking through what that will be like. I freaked out at the 9-year duration, but it looks like only 2 years of construction. So
Yes.
maybe it won't be as bad as we thought. I think there'll be a real question for our community on these next 2 years. Are we going to use this time to focus on this particular grade separation, which to date we really have not for a variety of other reasons, and take advantage of this, what I will call medium-sized window of opportunity, because it would just really be unfortunate for everyone to extend this. To be doing all of your construction and then all of our construction. I kid you not, I do have some friends who are like literally when we're doing the grade separation, planning to rent their house and be somewhere else. I don't know how many other people are planning that, but the disruption is really meaningful. So I think that's a question that we as a rail committee should be bringing forward to the council about how we should be using these next 2 years. In general, this is the first time it seems like it might actually happen. Up until now, it seemed a little bit more hypothetical. Final question. What have you learned from the 5 that are much farther along in the process than we are? The 5 that you mentioned already, including Burlingame and the ones in Mountain View. What have they learned that we should be thinking about?
I think the primary takeaway is that early and active involvement with Caltrain to help us with the interpretation of our standards as to what is the art of the possible to yield the best benefit.
So you realize that means we aren't even going to let you leave the building. Now that you're here, we're going to be like, great. Okay, so
I'm just going to leave it like that.
all right. Well, I think fair to say we have been looking forward to that, and we're glad that it's arrived.
Thank you. So before we move forward with any more comments and questions, first I want to take a time check. I have another meeting to head to by 3:30. So if we can finish by 3:15, that would be super duper. But if not, I will make arrangements. And then, so if we can do 3:15, please. And I will open it for oral communication for public speaking. Is that okay with just to hear what the public has to say? So I think Mr. Sumner has something to say.
Thank you. Thank you, council, and thank you for bringing me in. Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Martin Summer. I'm a homeowner and a resident in downtown Palo Alto here. And I've been involved with this as long as Nadia, since 2009, the Coverly Center. 2 reasons why I'm here. One is I wanted to meet some of the Caltrain personnel in person, which thank you very much. I did. And Navi actually has my contact information if you want to reach out. The second is first off, I want to say a wonderful conversation that we've had here, or that you've had. I have another way regarding the bridge, and it answers a lot of the how that we've been talking about. And I can also tell you the resistance that you'll get and how you could potentially deal with it. So the idea that I've floated around, and I've actually talked to Philip a little bit about it too, is that you could literally take Alma across the creek into Menlo Park and reconnect it in Menlo Park, because Alma is actually in Palo Alto and Menlo Park as well, and shoot the cars across the creek and don't even do an overpass for the Caltrain. And just let the cars flow, further north and south. And that has a lot of benefits. One, it would benefit residents of Palo Alto and Menlo Park are going north and south instead of crossing the tracks multiple times to get downtown. The second, though, is all of this conversation about, well, we can't have a shoe fly and we're going to have to do buses and on and on and on. You could literally put the infrastructure of the bridge for the cars in the creek ahead of time, do a double track shoe fly, bring the trains across there for the period of time that it takes you to actually rebuild the Caltrain bridge. Once the train bridge has been rebuilt and in place, bring those trains back onto it and then open it up for auto flows, down the lane, down the road. So that's how the resistance that you would get. There's two forms of resistance. I talked to Menlo Park residents, and the first thing they'll say is, I don't want that traffic in my neighborhood. Well, there's a lot that you can do these days with traffic flows, no right turns, et cetera, et cetera. The other one is there's a lot of people that love trees here, including myself. And I'm not talking about El Palo Alto itself, but there's a number of small trees that would have to be taken out, bringing the road across. I just want to say that trees can be replaced, and nobody would have ever thought that the tall trees next to the Kepler bookstore in Menlo Park would have ever been taken out, but they have been. So I might, just to pull it together, take Alma straight across the creek, run cars there, use that bridge temporarily to carry your trains until you get the other bridge rebuilt, bring it back, put cars in it, and you're done with it, and don't even consider an over or underpass on the Alma Street. Just forget the whole idea. So that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Nadia, did you want to say something?
I was just going to do part of the general questions, if that's okay.
Okay. Mayor Burt?
Sure. Well, thanks for a really valuable presentation and for that real encouragement on deep collaboration. I think we're all enthusiastic about that. One thing, in one of your earliest slides, you looked at replacement versus strengthening. And did I miss kind of talking about why the strengthening is not viable in any way?
So we evaluated, Mayor Burt, good question, appreciate it. We did look at the option of replacing it versus strengthening it. And there's two reasons. One is over time, with ridership forecasted to increase, that impact to the customer continues to increase, as if you're going from 6 trains to 8 trains to 10 trains, that impact during construction gets greater. The second is you're spending capital money on a Band-Aid, and then you're spending money again to refresh the asset, and the total cost increases as opposed to doing the capital replacement one time. So with those two data points, the decision was made to do a replacement versus a strengthening.
Well, I
And I'm
think
sure maybe there's some more
Yeah.
I forgot.
Yeah, sure. Just a few other things, like looking temporally, right? So, and I think we showed that list of all the things we looked at in the alternatives analysis, but we're also looking at the time, right? So if you're going to strengthen the bridge, you have to go through environmental clearance. We've talked about all those permits. And we found out that to environmentally clear a bridge strengthening, it takes the same amount of time, takes 2.5 years, right? It's kind of the same level of effort. And so when we mapped out the timing for strengthening the bridge, it was almost the same amount of time. It was like 7 years, right? So you're looking at 7 years versus the 9 years, right? With the 2 years in between. So it's like you do all this work, you clear everything, you strengthen the bridge, and then you're still kind of back at square one. You're still going to have to eventually rebuild it. Then that money is cumulative, right? You've spent that money. So I think there was also that consideration that strengthening the bridge is actually, I guess, in a little more invasive than you would think, right?
Yeah.
It's like its own effort. So those were just some of the things. And I remember that the environmental clearance really stood out to us as like, well, it's not any faster, right?
So I appreciate that, but when we're looking at this temporarily, if we aren't ready to move forward with this complex project of not only the bridge, Palo Alto Avenue, but whether that has to be integrated with our intermodal center reconstruction, then we're looking at a really big project, which is why the council 2 years ago, or 4 years ago, made the decision to peel off those issues from the rest of our grade separations, is because they had enormous complexity. And I'm not at all sanguine that we can be ready on our side for all those other aspects in the time frame that you're talking about, needing to replace the bridge. And so I think we'd welcome sharing. We haven't seen anything on, you said, well, we looked at this and decided such and such, but I'm not aware of that information being shared. And I think when you were talking about that coordination with the local agency, I'm not sure that it seems that you've done some really good analysis, but somewhat in isolation from us and our challenges around the intermodal center, Pal Ave, and the bridge. And it may be what you've decided on is exactly what we have to do, but I'm not certain of that. We may be in a position where if, what's that cost? How many years or decades would the strengthening provide us? And do we peel this off and say, oh no, maybe this is out a decade or two if we do the strengthening? That's a possibility. I'm not saying it's the correct decision, but I think we need to put the cards on the table in terms of looking at both the integration of that with the other projects and everything related to that. When you mentioned the El Palo Alto tree and being it and the bridge being eligible for National Historic Registry, I hadn't appreciated that it's not currently registered. It's listed, my understanding, as number 2 on the state list of historic sites, and yet I didn't realize it's not registered.
Yeah, and I think one thing to note there is, and we've talked with, our environmental leads, that even if it's eligible, like even if it's not registered, but it's eligible, we have to treat it as such.
Yeah.
So in the environmental clearance phase, we're going to get a lot more detail on that. But I think the term is treat it as such,
Yep.
right? And that's just abundance of caution. And just for a lot of reasons that we would want to do that. So I think we spent some time early on in the project really digging into that too. Like I'm sure you went to the website and looked up, and is it registered? Is it officially registered? And the word on this that we've got from the experts is, look, that doesn't matter. It's historically significant to the community, to the history of Palo Alto, Stanford University. The bridge itself as well being historically significant. It's quite old. Even looking at the plans, we have the original plans. It's actually kind of a trip to see these hand-drawn plans from, the 1900s, right? And we have them. And so there's a lot of history there. And so I think we have to treat it as such, and that's fully our intention to do so.
Well, that kind of goes to the strengthening versus replacement too. On the bridge side, so the tree is a lot more significant than the bridge. It's one of the real landmarks in the history of the state.
Yeah, 100 versus 1,000. Yeah.
Well, and it, just in the whole kind of discovery of the bay and all those things. Not to mention it's a very anomalous tree and being a old growth redwood on the bay. I would say entirely anonymous.
Yeah.
Anomalous. There is no other old growth redwood on the bay.
Yeah.
And it's been outgrown by a whole bunch of trees that are 100 years old or so, because it was almost killed off by neglect for a long while. But nevertheless, it's that old. And when you were, one thing you mentioned was from Mountain View that they had access to Measure A dollars.
No, I was just saying that in that portfolio, there's Measure A, Measure W, Measure B. We're working with all of those jurisdictions, and there's a variety of funding sources. Not that, A has a certain area of it does, W does, B does,
Right.
but I just said there's 3 different pots of money that are focused on grade separations, but each one has its own specific jurisdictional boundary. Maybe, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear.
Yeah, I'm still struggling with I'm not aware of Measure A having dollars available for grade separations. Nadia, you're on the oversight committee that doesn't meet.
That's the 1998 one.
Right.
I think there's money available actually for the transit center is one of the things that's
Well,
still
there was
available
supposed
to
to be.
Measure
So
A.
this is why I brought it up. Measure A had originally, there were 2 North County major projects that were part of Measure A, Dumbarton Bridge and the Palo Alto Transit Center, Intermodal Transit Center. And both of those had those dollars diverted basically to pay for BART shortfalls. And that was a big political issue as we went into Measure B, was to try to lock down that we wouldn't see a repeat of that. But I wasn't, if there are dollars available for Measure A that I'm not aware of, I want to make sure. Okay. The other agency that we may need to be engaging with on this is Caltrans, because of the proximity of really the Palo Alto Avenue grade separation, Del Camino, the whole need to coordinate there. It's gone, one of the issues that we've had on our various grade separations is that given that Caltrans, it's unlike a few other cities, they still control that highway, and yet the whole signal timing and coordination becomes important as it relates to grade separations and even construction. And then, so you think the construction would be a 2-year downtime?
Yeah, that is the preliminary schedule at this point, realizing it's taking a look at, okay, we got to replace this bridge. We haven't started any design on it yet. About how long do you think that would take? The Guadalupe River Bridge work is 2 years. We're getting ready to go to the board next Monday in order to award that contract. It's a 2-year construction cycle. So it's just an early, like I said, very draft preliminary high-level schedule.
The reason I ask is, given its relatively short span compared to, say, the Guadalupe, have you been looking at any possibility of a prefab and a drop-in?
Not yet, but we will.
We will.
Lindsay was nodding just saying
Oh, no, I was saying yes. Yeah. No, we've this has definitely come up.
And
And
so
Rob's the
if-
expert. So yeah.
Is your 2-year period assuming that it would be construct on site and that it might be brought down if we were able to have a prefab drop-in?
Like I said, we haven't done the homework yet. But as part of our processes, we'll do the alternative delivery analysis to select the appropriate method. Whether it be design, bid, build, low bid, or CMGC or progressive design build. I don't want to characterize the results of that process because you have to do your homework. But this is one of those types of projects that the how matter a lot, and getting an early contractor involvement to explore the art of the possible. If you did prefabricate the bridge and you were to drop it in, what would that mean? Where would you place the cranes? How would you get access? How wide are the roads? What are the turning radiuses? Where would you put the cranes? All
there's a whole
those
bunch of
things,
stuff on the
all those
feasibility of a
things,
drop-in,
all
I
those
get
things
that.
matter. And so, but we would have to first figure out what's the right delivery model and then begin to figure out. the
Yeah,
what
I
and
was
how.
just trying to understand at a high level, is it reasonable to assume that if a drop-in was feasible, it would reduce the downtime. And that the 2-year is based on an assumption of a build on site.
Right. It's just a very high level.
Right. I
Yes,
appreciate you haven't gone a
Yeah.
long ways in there. I just had just a high level assumption.
yes.
If we were able to do a drop in, my assumption is that it would shave some of the downtime.
I believe it would.
Okay. I think. Oh, and then just on, we were talking about the elevation, and a lot of we often don't perceive this, but not only is Menlo Park elevated on the other side of the bridge, and then it carries over here. There's a difference in elevation on the west side versus the east side of the tracks, and we often don't appreciate that until you go out here and look at the Homer underpassing. And if you're on the side of Palo Alto Medical Foundation, it looks like it's virtually a grade. If you look at it from Alma, it's a several foot elevation. And so I'm trying to remember the exact elevation studies between the Menlo Park coming down to our train station and then all the way down to Churchill. But you mentioned, slight differences and changes in elevation may be feasible without it having a significant impact. And that might be what we're looking at is the value of slight increases. So I think that covers mine. Thanks again for a real informative presentation.
Ms. Nayak?
Thank you. So the clerk's going to pull up an image for me. In this image right there, is there any way you could zoom into the picture a bit more?
I don't know how high quality it is.
It's okay, but so
Yeah.
I don't know if you could see, but behind,
Oh, there we go.
behind the Stanford Hotel, there's actually a siding. Do you see the extra track?
Yes.
Yes,
Set out
yeah.
track, yes.
Right. And so the question, I guess one of the things that had always been discussed around the rail nerds, because we talked about this stuff.
Is that a shoe, use it as a shoe fly?
Could you use that as the shoe fly track or is that the new placement of the bridge? So,
Yeah, I had that as a single track shoe fly in my notes, but we hadn't studied enough, so I didn't say it.
yeah, and I understand that further back, you've got this new bio restoration area, which I don't understand what that is, but that's further behind, right? But there is this space behind the Stanford Hotel where there is a little bit more wiggle room. And my understanding was that helps straighten part of the curve. Like if you move the train bridge over literally one set of tracks, not two, but just one, so that into that second one, you would be able to both fix the high-speed rail alignment issue and come into the station area at the correct angle. So I don't know if that's correct, but I'll just throw that out there for you guys when you do your homework to think about as
Yeah.
a
And then
possibility.
Another consideration could be that historic bridge gets left and converted to like a pedestrian bridge or bike and pedestrian bridge or something. So just throwing it out there.
There's no room.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
We've got a bike and ped bridge now.
there is one. I was going to point that out that
Yeah.
I didn't quite mention, you can't see it here because of like the Google map thing, but
And the trees.
the one, it was constructed in the 90s, so it's alongside it, but I think there might be another view where you can kind of see it.
Yeah.
But another thing we have talked about is like the bridge structure itself, it's historic. Like there have been instances of agencies donating that structure, like as a public art at playgrounds, right? I mean, so there's a lot of possibilities.
bridge, yeah.
There's a ped bridge. The other thing I think this photo is a little outdated because the rain garden was constructed like early pandemic, so people didn't
But
quite.
behind the hotel or behind this, it's behind
It's-
Middle Plaza, which is further up where that. what looks like-
Yeah.
Is that the stormwater part that the?
No, not the stormwater part. This
Yeah,
is
it's
the-
something I wish we had and next time we come, we actually do have better pictures that can show you how close it is, but there's now a fence.
And that's.
Yeah.
slide.
It shows,
Yeah.
it shows that it's
We
offset,
can get
yeah.
that back up.
It's offset, but it's I'll just say like it's pretty close. Like essentially
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
you've
yeah.
got a fence and then you've got those basins. And so right now they look like fire retention basins, but the way that Menlo Park Public Works explained it to us is that it's supposed to become somewhat of a self-sustaining rain garden over time. So when we first saw them, we also were kind of like, whoa, what is this, right? And we weren't aware. And then that's when we engaged with Menlo Park. But I think next time we could just bring some better pictures. If you do go back to that
Yeah, I
slide,
see it. It
you
is
can
directly
see
behind
it. It's like it's just really close. And when we initially, we did some surveying.
Page 5.
Yeah, we did some initial surveying. I want to say it was like early 2021 when we were getting ready for the inspections. That's when we noticed them. And it's not on our right of way, right? But it's so close that we have to take that into consideration. And then the fact that they told us it's going to become a rain garden, meaning there will be willows, there will be reeds, there will, it's going to change over time. And that's part of their policy, I think, of having sort of like a more of a closed water treatment facility associated with Middle Plaza. But I'm sure that Menlo Park could tell you more about it. But yeah, it's right there.
Yeah, I see.
Essentially, yeah. So we wouldn't own that land anyway, right? But now it's taken up by something that's now a natural feature. So
So
to have to point that out, yeah.
I did want to point out, so the distance between Meadow and Charleston and our neck of the woods is 1/3 of a mile. And the distance from Palo Alto Avenue to the Ravenswood crossing, as they have, is 0.75. And I think anything that's certainly, I think it's a little bit over half a mile where you start to think about, you have to think about those grade separations together. So we're real close. I also wanted to say, I'm not sure, well, to Mayor Burt's point, I don't know if you guys have had access yet to the LiDAR study that was done of the tree roots that was done by the city arborist. So they had like some new technology on tree mapping, and I'm happy to share that with you because I've
That'd
had
be
these
terrific.
comments
Yeah, we
over the years. So I have the original study that was done by Dave Doctor, who was the longtime Palo Alto arborist. And then I
Tree
think,
doctor.
yeah, Robert Booty, I think, is our current arborist now, or at least the one who gave me the documents a few years ago. But I do have those, and they were able to use some new thing that shows you exactly where the roots
Of the El Palo Alto tree.
of the
and
El
kind
Palo,
the
of all of the mass there, but then they're, because I'm not sure they can tell which tree root
right.
is
that's what I
which.
was gonna say.
But they can see where the root balls are versus other stuff, which will be
Okay.
relevant to, I mean, part of the problem is all those eucalyptus trees, right? And how their roots are different than the.
Right.
Right. And then I just wanted to say from a comment perspective, having looked at this before and understanding that the community in general is not super excited about viaducts. But I will say as a resident that downtown areas are one of the few areas where viaducts make a bit more sense because you're able to connect through more roads. We don't have in the Meadow and Charleston area, all of the backyards go up against the tracks, so there's no way to poke through those roads. But in our part of the city, downtown is one of those few places where you might be able to make those connections. And I will just say that the need for those bus accommodations, some of that may really matter, and those new connections may be critical. And in terms of agencies that you might need to interface with, you may not know that the Palo Alto multimodal station, it has one of the largest bus stations so you have things like AC Transit and other agencies that are not in the immediate vicinity, whose buses also come to our station area, who might also be impacted by any kind of closure. So just to throw that out there, as if you didn't have enough obstacles, I just want to name one more because it sounds like it's going to be a breeze.
Public works projects are challenging.
Yeah.
So
It's been a career doing those.
Just to follow up on pre-pandemic, I was shocked a number of years ago to be told that, and I had trouble believing it and had it verified, that there are not 1 to 200 bus boardings per day at our transit center. It was 900, phenomenal number. So that is a complexity. I will also say that if you found that you had to remove any eucalyptus trees for this project, I won't shed a tear.
Well, and lastly, I will just say, as someone who has spent way more time in the Palo Alto archives than I care to admit, the distance between Palo Alto Avenue and University Avenue is actually not that long either. And so once you need to go up for one, you may need to change another. And that opens up the issues of not just the station area, but the existing grade separation that was built in 1940. And I'm not sure how much of the history you know, but El Camino was actually included as part of that project when the grade separation, the University Avenue grade separation was built, the lowering of El Camino also happened on the same side. In fact, if you're coming from South Palo Alto and going north towards the Sanford Mall, you can see a sign that still says subway, which is what they used to call underpasses.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
the
it's like-
sign is
it's
still
like
there.
3,000 feet between those Palo Alto and Stanford Station.
Yeah, it's fairly close, right?
Yeah,
When you
yeah.
talk about if you move one, you've got to move both. That's
Right.
that's it, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, when we talk about the complexity, like you're talking about 2 years, but it's the reconstruction of potentially encapsulate our entire multimodal station,
Yep.
our University Avenue grade separation, our Palo Alto Avenue grade separation, working the old Palo Alto tree, and then all the other stuff that happens just on the other side of the border, right? So,
And just following up on that, when, you've made the point on just the age of this bridge, but that underpass at University is not only old, but the whole redesign of the intermodal transit center that was part of the Measure A, and we had 20 plus years ago, a whole redesign preliminarily done of that, really begs the question of whether and when that has to be a complete redo. And to what extent is that related to what we need to do at the creek and the bridge and Palo Alto Avenue? And that goes back to my earlier point of, there's a downside to spending money to reinforce the existing bridge, but you add these projects together and it is just potentially massive. And coming up with a real cohesive plan for that within the next few years is going to be a real stretch, if not an impossibility.
well, and I'll direct my last comments towards the council members. I think the one thing that I've learned in doing this for a while is that the one areas that get grade separations are not sexy in terms of a funding perspective until you loop a bunch of them together, right? Or you get a bridge replacement, but they become really sexy when you start talking about station areas. And so you may be eligible for more funding and may be able to access much greater help on the federal, on the state level, if you think about this as one enormous reconfiguration of things. And I think that that's something that we ought to think about. I would also say that, to Councilmember Cormack's point, you guys are going to have to decide how to prioritize your crossings. And I think, unfortunately, this just got put number one on your list because you've got a temporal time constraint that means that that bridge is in danger versus anything else that's been happening anywhere.
And so assuming we don't consider repair
Yeah, sure.
or strengthen.
Well, which is the reason why it's good that we start this conversation now, and it's good that we're meeting and the team is formed. But I did want to ask Philip, did you have something to say?
I mean, I think the time's passed, but I was just going to mention the different transit services that are at the station. There's the AC Transit, as you mentioned, which is the Dumbarton Express. There's Samtrans, VTA. Then we have the Stanford Marguerite, and also several different private employers that have their buses there,
Right.
and local regional shuttles.
I mean, most of my comments and my questions have been asked by Mayor Burt and Nadia, but I did want to, what you just said, when you talk about integrated teams, it's not just for construction, design, et cetera, but also for the transit component afterwards, making sure that there is first mile, last mile, and so forth. But also, Philip, how does this fit into our work plan? Because I don't know, I don't think this was part of our work plan.
So I actually do believe that we included this as part of the work plan in anticipation that there was something, because we knew that the study was going on. So we knew that there was the study going on. As they mentioned, we met back in 2021 initially to discuss that the study was going to happen. I believe the study got delayed a little bit, but then the study happened. So we knew this was coming. So that I believe it is incorporated in the work plan list. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. Rippin's is saving my memory here. Yeah, so it was included. So I do believe this is totally within the scope of the rail committee.
So in a way, we're going to have to kind of take a look at this, regroup, and then how to incorporate this, since prioritizing it, because I know every time I see Molly peeking over. Okay. So we just have to kind of reprioritize and kind of look at where everything comes in, because South Palo Alto is very eager about the Charleston and East Meadow grade steps also. So let's kind of take a look at
And
that.
I'll just emphasize my biggest ask is that that you share all the information on the alternative of strengthening versus replacement in the nearer term. Because I understand why you drew the conclusions you did, but in this broader context, I'm not sure that's the decision. we should be making. And I think we need to look at, what are those cost impacts? How much time would it buy? All those factors that go into that decision.
Right, this historical aspect of that location is pretty important to the people here in Palo Alto. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And a lot of outreach to the community is going to be necessary so that they understand it's not just going away or it's going to be hurt or damaged in any way.
And I guess even following up on the comment is a question of, I'd be interested in understanding why strengthening is such a temporary solution as opposed to potentially a permanent solution.
Appreciate the question. We'll work with your team on those.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have anything else? That questions, comments? If not, I want to say thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure meeting you, and it's just a valuable presentation and understanding today. So really, thank you. And I look forward to us working more together.
Likewise, thank you so
Yep.
much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, so we're finished with item number 2, study session. Next steps and future agenda. I think we spoke about that a little bit, but can we firm it up?
Yeah, so I actually, let me open my calendar and see, do we have any issues with the currently planned October 19th date?
It's already on my calendar.
Yeah, it's on mine too.
As long as there's no conflicts.
What did Leslie have on the email? I don't know why I don't have it on mine. It's my fault, but I can certainly, and Chair Koo, I always block this till 4. I thought that was our
Oh,
agreed
okay.
upon time. So if that's not right, I'm happy to block
I
it till 3, but just
was
anyway.
trying to have some expectancy of the time, but if we're gonna block it to 4, then is that something staff is okay with? Going from 1 to 4?
always leave early.
So-
Yeah,
Okay, well, then in that case, I'll block it to 4 as well. Thank you, Councilmember Cormac.
Yeah, I think we might actually need the extra time for our next couple meetings, so.
Okay,
And then what is the November date?
20.
It's a third Wednesday.
Oh, yeah.
The 16th?
Yep,
Mhm.
16.
Yeah, so I'm unable to make that date. I apologize, but
I might have a problem on that date as well.
shall we just do a doodle for November and see, please?
sure.
Just noting.
I'm
I
sure
think
staff
the-
will hate me, but I could actually do the 23rd.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
It's Thanksgiving week, but the week.
I know, but it's the day before Thanksgiving.
I believe I will be out of office on the 23rd.
You don't have to wait for us. Really, thank you so much.
But the week before, the 9th, maybe is what we want to look at.
All right, so,
It strikes me that I think we'll need to coordinate that date with Caltrain as well, so.
right. Okay, very good. All right, so dates we'll be setting, and we're expecting October to be feedback on with the other organizations like Payback and get an update from PAUSD. All right, so if there's nothing else, then we're adjourned.
All right.
Oh,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, we'll finalize the agenda with you.
Thank you very much.